Shalom, this is Daniel John Lee with Torah Restoration Ministries, and this is my midweek podcast. Title of today's podcast is episode 23, Where the Church Went Wrong. And we're just going to take a look at history to see where Satan was able to corrupt the majority of believers and has resulted in the horror known as Christianity or modern day Christianity that we have today. It started way back in the first century, because in the first century, even when the apostles were active, you had the first century Gnostics, and these Gnostics were heavily influenced by the Greek philosopher Plato. Now, Plato had a whole philosophy worked out where essentially he said that physical things were bad or less meaningful, while spiritual ideas and things were good. Okay, so the act of prayer was very, very good, but eating was bad. Anything that had to do with the flesh was bad. Anything that was spiritual was good. And of course, this is a pretty big heresy, because if you look at the Tanakh, the Torah specifically, we know that the physical commandments, such as circumcision, eating clean foods, things of that nature, are just as spiritual as the act of prayer or getting mikvahed or anything like that. But this idea that somehow spiritual things are better or good while physical things are bad, this heresy has seeped into much of modern Christianity through various theologies, and is why most of the church rejects the Torah today. Moving on to the second century, we have Marcion. I did a podcast on this person a week or so ago. He tried to make a division between the Tanakh, calling it the so-called Old Testament, and the Brit Hadashah, calling it the so-called New Testament. Though he was considered a heretic at the time, his mindset, coupled with Gnosticism, permeates most of modern Christianity like a cancer. Going forward to the 4th century Constantinian apostasy. This, of course, is where the Torah-observant Messianics were persecuted and the Roman Catholic Church began to emerge. This apostasy was so great it led to 1,000 years that even the heathen referred to as the Dark Ages. Numerous false doctrines were created under the Constantinian apostasy, such as the Trinity, no need for Torah keeping, Easter observance rather than Passover, unclean food eating, pagan temples and churches created, hierarchy of priests and pastors, etc. Then we have Augustine, who lived around this time. He was a heretic to the core. He was heavily influenced by Platonic thought. He helped revive much of Gnosticism and Marcion thinking, as well as turning Yahweh into a more Greek, timeless deity. He also thought you could sin and win. He has led many, many to hellfire. Then, of course, we have the Roman Catholic Church. This organization started the Christmas celebrations, which formerly was the Feast of Saturnalia, but they rubber stamped it with Christianity and called it Christmas. They observed Halloween. They made a series of idiotic pagan rituals that they borrowed from pagan nations. This, of course, is rotten to the core. Skipping forward to the Reformation of the 1500s, we have Luther, Martin Luther. Though he initially was used by Yah to bring down the Roman Catholic Church, he adopted much of Augustine's corrupt theology and thus lost his savor and perished, as far as we know, in gross sin. There's a quote attributed to Martin Luther that says, toward the end of his life when he was in exile, said if he couldn't get it with the wife, he'd get it with the maid. You have John Calvin, contemporary of Luther. He's a puppet of Augustine. He created some of the most absurd and unintellectual doctrines known to man, making sin into an inevitable choice and stripping man of his free will. Skipping forward into the 19th century, we have Charles Finney. And although he was initially used by Yahweh, he also began to adopt Calvinistic doctrine toward the end of his life. If you read his systematic theology, toward the end of that, you start seeing his Calvinistic doctrine sort of coming forth. He also became humanistic in his thinking. He denied the need to do the civil and ceremonial laws of the Torah. He divided the law into sections, which existed nowhere except in his mind and in the minds of theologians. His thinking was Platonic, although much less so than the reformers that came before him. the beginning of the 20th century, we have the Assemblies of God. In the wake of the Azusa Street revival, men who had been flooded with the Ruach HaKadosh sought to work together. But the devil told them not to use the name of Messiah, Yahshua, and Yahweh. These men grieved the Ruach by insisting on only using the name of Jesus, thus falling into the same error as the apostate priests of Baal. These priests of Baal who refused to use the Hebrew names became known as the Assemblies of God. Number 10, Billy Graham. Initially used by Yah, he soon became corrupt as he embraced the Roman Catholic Church and has become so wicked he recently said Clinton's wife would make a great president. He is Laodicean to the core. Then we have the charismatic Pentecostal movements and renewals that began in the 1970s. These were initially birthed by Yah, but they have now become self-exalting and have refused to press on into Torah, leading to many lying signs and wonders, such as Benny Hinn, etc. And finally, number 12, the Messianic Jewish movement. This, of course, was initially birthed by Yah to help bring the charismatic and Pentecostal believers, along with the Protestants and Catholics at large, back to their Hebrew roots. But they refused to accept Gentiles as equal to Jews. They worshipped Talmud more than Torah. They said Gentiles could be Torah breakers, that the Torah was only for the Jews. The Ruach was quickly grieved away from this Messianic Jewish cult, and it has since spawned many doctrinal errors amongst the Two-Housers, Sacred Namers, Hebrew Israelites, and an abundance of other Antichrist Messianic groups. These, along with the Dominion theologians, will be used to enthrone the anti-Messiah. Kabbalists and Talmudists will lead them all to destruction. Now, it's important to remember that despite these 12 points that I've highlighted where Satan has had victory over the church, the truth of keeping the Torah out of a love for Yahshua has been preserved through the ages. Because as Yahshua told his disciples, truly the gates of hell shall not overcome the bride of Messiah. So we've always had a remnant of people who continue to observe the Torah, continue to walk in the Spirit. And despite the many apostate moments of history in the church that have led to the mess we have today, we still do have those who are pure. We have the true bride. And that true bride, of course, will overcome, even if that true bride is persecuted, as we read in the book of Revelation, where there are many martyrs, and the beast is able to behead many of those who follow Yahshua, even if they are very few in number, as we read that only 144,000 who love Yahshua survived the tribulation. So, despite how small in number they become, and despite how much they are persecuted, there is a true bride that is out there, and that overcomes and emerges in victory at the end of the age. But it's important to know history. It's important to know these particular points that I've highlighted so that we can understand why modern Christianity is so corrupt today. This helps us realize where these different doctrines and understandings and confusions came from, and how they perverted the purity of scriptures. And if we can see in history where they came from, and we can remove them from our understanding, then we can purify our religion. We can make sure that we're following the scriptures much more accurately. We can draw closer to our Messiah, please Yahweh, and be more effective for his kingdom and in ministering to others. So I hope this sort of history lesson podcast was a blessing to you. I wish you all a very wonderful rest of your week as we now approach the Sabbath day, the Shabbat, and a few days after that will be the 9th of Av, which is a pretty significant date in Jewish history. May Yah bless you and keep you. Shalom.